My daughter Laboob just made the worst mistake of her life. An hour ago, I received a text message that said, "Grandma, I borrowed your old ring for the party. Hope you don't mind." I replied kindly, "Have fun, dear." But the moment I sent that message, I called my lawyer, Frank Miller, and said, "File a theft report immediately. Stolen item number 847. A pink diamond ring valued at $3 million. Less than an hour later, police stormed an elegant party where Cynthia was proudly showing off my ring, completely unaware that she was wearing a priceless masterpiece and not some useless trinket. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this story will leave you speechless. My name is Dolores. I'm 71 years old, and for the past 10 years, I've lived as the invisible mother-in-law, the elderly woman everyone pretends not to notice, the one who supposedly gets in the way at family gatherings. To Cynthia, I was nothing more than an annoying old woman living in a house my late husband left me. She joined our family a decade ago when she married my son, Lois. From the very first day, she made it clear that I didn't belong. Cynthia is the kind of woman who believes the world owes her everything. Polished, manipulative, always dressed in expensive red and green gowns, dripping in jewelry my son bought just to keep her satisfied the moment she moved in. She started treating me like her personal servant. "Dolores, make me coffee. Dolores, iron my black dress for tonight. Dolores, walk quietly. I have a headache." She never addressed me with respect. To her, I wasn't even a person with a name, just the old lady Dot at family dinners. She spoke about me as if I wasn't even there. "Louis, your mother should really think about moving into a retirement home. This house is far too big for someone her age." And my son, my own son, would lower his eyes and mumble, "Mum is fine here, Cynthia." But I could feel it. Things were changing. Louis began to look at me differently, as if I were a burden. Slowly, quietly, Cynthia poisoned his mind, whispering that I was too old to manage such a large house, that they needed the space for their future. She had plans, big ones. My living room was going to become her private office. The garden my husband and I had lovingly cared for over 40 years was destined to be transformed into a modern entertainment space. For years, I endured her humiliations in silence. When guests came over, Cynthia introduced me only as Lois's mother, never as the homeowner, during her parties. I was told to stay hidden in my bedroom because, according to her, old people make guests uncomfortable. There were nights when I cried quietly, wondering how I had become invisible in the very home I built with love. What Cynthia never knew, what no one in my family knew, was that my late husband, Mario, left me far more than just this house. In his final years, Mario had been quietly collecting valuable art, rare jewelry, and antiques. He trusted me because I never flaunted wealth. He knew I would protect his legacy. Hidden behind a painting in my bedroom was a private safe containing a collection worth over $15 million, and among those treasures was the ring Cynthia had just borrowed, a 5-carat pink diamond ring, crafted by a French jeweler in 1920, valued at $3 million. To anyone unfamiliar with fine jewelry, it looked like nothing more than a tasteful antique ring. But to experts, it was a true masterpiece. That day, Cynthia was attending an important charity gala, one of those lavish events where wealthy wives parade their gowns and silently compete over who owns the most impressive jewels. For weeks, I had listened to her complain that she lacked the perfect accessory for her gold dress. She spent hours flipping through jewelry catalogs, sighing dramatically because everything she liked was far too expensive. Even with the generous allowance Louis gave her. That morning, while I was watering the plants in the garden, I saw her walk into my bedroom without asking. It wasn't the first time she had gone through my belongings, but this time felt different. I watched as she opened my jewelry box, a small wooden chest where I keep only my less valuable pieces. Her gaze stopped on the pink diamond ring. She lifted it, held it up to the light, and that familiar look appeared on her face. The smug, dismissive smile she wore whenever she thought she had found something she could take advantage of. An hour later, I received her message. "I borrowed your old ring for the party, Grandma. Hope you don't mind." She hadn't even bothered to ask for permission. She simply took it, convinced that everything I owned belonged to her by default, that I was too old, too insignificant to possess anything truly valuable. When I read that message, something inside me finally shifted. For 10 years, I had tolerated her insults, her cruelty, her constant reminders of my age and supposed uselessness. But taking that ring, one of the most valuable pieces in Mario's hidden collection, was the final straw. I sat down in my garden chair, staring at my phone. And for the first time in years, I genuinely smiled. "Have fun, dear," I replied. Then I immediately called Frank, my lawyer, and Mario's closest friend. Frank was the only person who knew the full truth about our concealed fortune. "Frank," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in years, "it's time to activate the protocol you and Mario prepared. Cynthia has stolen inventory item 847. There was a pause on the line. Then Frank laughed softly. "Dolores, are you absolutely certain? Once we begin this, there's no going back." "Yes," I said, after a decade of humiliation. It was time for my daughter-in-law to learn exactly who she was dealing with. Frank reminded me of the plan. Over the years, he had carefully documented every item in Mario's collection, officially registering them as high-value assets. Each piece carried an inventory number, certificates of authenticity, updated appraisals, and full insurance coverage. The ring Cynthia had taken was legally registered as item 847, valued at $3 million. "I'll contact the insurance company immediately," Frank said. According to protocol, when a registered item is taken without authorization, it must be reported as theft. Within 30 minutes, the police will have a warrant to recover it, wherever it may be. While Frank made the calls, I sat in my living room, reliving years of quiet humiliation. The evening Cynthia hosted a dinner for Lois's business partners and told me to eat in the kitchen because there wasn't enough room at the table. Last Christmas, when she unwrapped expensive gifts from Lubu's, then handed me a cheap scarf and said, "We got you something simple. At your age, you don't need much anymore." The afternoon her friends came for book club while I was reading in my favorite chair. She walked in and said, in front of everyone, "Dolores, could you go to your room? We need privacy to discuss important matters." Her friends looked at me with pity, as if I were an old pet being moved aside. But the memory that hurt the most was the phone call I overheard just a week earlier. I swear. "This old woman is driving me insane," Cynthia told her sister, Gretchen. "She lives in this massive house like a queen, yet look at how she dresses. That cheap jewelry, it's embarrassing. Louis and I are just waiting for her to move into a retirement home. When she finally does, I'm renovating everything and throwing all her ugly antiques straight into the trash." That was the moment I knew I could no longer remain silent. She didn't just despised everything Mario and I had built together. And she had no idea that those ugly antiques she mocked were worth more than she could earn in several lifetimes. Frank called back, "Everything is in motion, Dolores. The theft report has been officially filed. The ring is listed as stolen property valued at $3 million. I've provided the police with the hotel address where the gala is taking place. They've been ordered to recover it immediately." "And what will happen to Cynthia?" I asked. "Legally speaking," Frank said carefully, "this qualifies as grand larceny. We're talking about $3 million. She could face several years in prison. But you're the victim. The decision to press charges is yours." I told him I needed time to think. For now, I just wanted to see her face when she realized she had completely underestimated the useless old woman she despised. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Louis, frantic, panicked. "Mum, what's going on?" "The police just stormed Cynthia's party. They're saying she stole a $3 million ring. This has to be a mistake." "It isn't a mistake," I said calmly. "Your wife took a valuable piece from your father's collection without permission. That ring is worth exactly $3 million. "What collection?" he asked, stunned. "Dad never owned anything like that. Mum, you need to call the police and tell them this was a misunderstanding. It was unbelievable. My own son had no idea. Mario had kept his wealth hidden even from Louis, to protect our family from kidnappers, fraudsters, and relatives who appear only when money is involved. Louis, I said quietly, there are many things you don't know about your father and about me. Your wife made a very serious mistake, and this time she will face the consequences alone. Mom, have you lost your mind? He cried. Cynthia is in tears. They're treating her like a criminal, Louis said desperately. Her friends are filming everything. Her reputation is ruined. Her reputation, I repeated coldly. What about the 10 years I spent being treated like garbage in my own home? What about every time she humiliated me in front of others? What about the moment she told her sister I was pathetic? Louis fell silent. He knew exactly which conversation I meant because he had overheard it himself and had chosen to do nothing. Mum, please, he finally muttered. Cynthia can be difficult, but she doesn't deserve to go to prison over a misunderstanding. This was not a misunderstanding, Louis, I replied firmly. It was theft. And now your wife is going to learn that the woman she despised so deeply is not the helpless old lady she imagined. I ended the call and sat in silence, absorbing everything that had happened. My son, my own son, had spent 10 years watching his wife belittle and humiliate me, never once raising his voice in my defense. Now that consequences had finally arrived. He expected me to save her from her own arrogance, but I wasn't going to do it. For the first time in a decade, I refused to be the invisible woman who suffered quietly 20 minutes later. Frank arrived at my house, accompanied by Patrick, a private investigator he had worked with for years. Patrick was in his 50s, polished and professional, specializing in fraud and art theft. Dolores, Frank said, Patrick has been discreetly investigating Cynthia for the past 6 months. Ever since you mentioned your concerns, I was stunned. What concerns? I never told you I suspected her. Frank smiled gently. Do you remember our conversation in December? You mentioned that some small items seemed to have moved, and that your jewelry box hadn't been in the same place several times. I remembered. I had blamed it on my age, on forgetfulness. That wasn't imagination, Frank said. I decided to look into it quietly. What Patrick discovered goes far beyond today's ring. Patrick opened a thick folder filled with photographs and documents. Mrs. Dolores, he said, your daughter-in-law has been selling items from your collection for nearly 2 years. She started small antique brooches, pearl earrings, a silver necklace, items you might have assumed were misplaced. My heart began to race. We've documented at least 12 separate sales at pawn shops and antique dealers across the city. Patrick continued. The total value comes to approximately $45,000. I felt sick. Cynthia hadn't just humiliated me, she had been stealing from me for years. But how? I asked. How did she know what to take without me noticing? She was careful, Patrick replied. She only took pieces you rarely wore or kept buried in drawers. She had been mentally cataloguing your jewelry for years, identifying what she could remove without immediate detection. He turned another page. We also found evidence that she photographed many of your valuable belongings, likely planning future sales, Frank added. Patrick has recordings of Cynthia at 3 different pawn shops. In one, she claims the jewelry belonged to her deceased grandmother. In another, she says her husband gave it to her. But she urgently needed cash for a medical emergency. A wave of fury and betrayal washed over me for 2 years, while I blamed myself for losing things, while I feared my memory was failing. Cynthia had been systematically robbing me and lying about it. And there's more, Patrick said quietly. He showed me financial records. Her spending doesn't match the income she and your son officially earned. Over the last 2 years, Cynthia has purchased over $30,000 worth of clothing, cosmetic procedures, luxury trips, and high-end dining. He looked up. When we compared those expenses with the money she made selling your jewelry, the numbers align perfectly. So the elegant red and green gowns, the designer handbags she flaunted, the expensive shoes she wore while looking down on me, all of it had been funded by my stolen belongings. She had financed her luxurious lifestyle by stealing from the useless old woman she despised. But if you knew all this, I asked slowly, why didn't you tell me sooner? Frank exchanged a glance with Patrick. We needed enough evidence for an airtight case, Frank said, and we needed her to make a mistake so serious she couldn't manipulate her way out of it. He paused. Today's theft of a $3 million ring was that mistake. At that moment, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered double quotes, Mrs. Dolores. A nervous female voice said, "This is Detective Margaret Garcia with the Metropolitan Police. We're at the Plaza Hotel with your daughter. She insists you gave her permission to take the ring and that this is all a misunderstanding. Could you come clarify the situation?" Detective, I replied calmly, my daughter-in-law took that ring without my consent. I have the text message where she admits she borrowed it without asking. The ring is valued at $3 million and is part of a legally registered collection. I understand, ma'am, the detective said carefully. But your son is here as well. He insists you've never owned jewelry of that value and that there must be an appraisal error. I laughed at it. Sound that surprised even Frank and Patrick. So, my son believes I couldn't possibly own something valuable because I appear poor or foolish, I said. Is that correct? There was an uncomfortable silence. Well, he did mention you live on a modest pension and haven't shown signs of such wealth. Detective Garcia, I said evenly. I'll be at the hotel within the hour. I'll bring my lawyer and all documentation proving ownership of the ring, as well as evidence that my daughter-in-law has been stealing from me for years. I expect that when I arrive, she will be in police custody. Us is appropriate for someone who stole property worth over $3 million. After I hung up, I looked at Frank and Patrick. Gentlemen, I said, it's time for Cynthia and my son to learn exactly who they've been dealing with all these years. Frank smiled slightly. Is there anything else I should know before we go? Patrick nodded. Cynthia has been communicating with an art appraiser named Mark. She showed him photos of several paintings and sculptures from your collection. She believed she could sell them for at least $200,000. He added quietly, in her own words, she said, "The old woman doesn't even know what she owns. I could steal half her things and she'd never notice it. She's too senile to keep track." Those words struck me like a slap. She hadn't just been stealing from me, she had been mocking me, laughing at me, convinced I was too weak and foolish to notice. I stood up, feeling a strength I hadn't felt in years. "Frank," I said, "I want every possible charge filed for today's theft and for everything she's taken over the past 2 years. And I want my son to know exactly who he married. Are you certain?" Frank asked. "Once this becomes public, the family will learn the truth about Mario's fortune and about Cynthia's crimes. There will be no turning back." I looked out at the garden Mario and I had nurtured for 40 years. The very garden Cynthia wanted to destroy for her modern entertainment. "Space. I've been invisible long enough," I said. "It's time this senile old woman taught them a lesson they will never forget." When we arrived at the Plaza Hotel, the scene was exactly as I expected. Police cars lined the entrance, reporters hovered nearby, guests poured out of the building, whispering, pointing. Filming. This was a scandal our city's high society would remember for years. As I stepped into the lobby, I immediately saw Cynthia. She was sitting on a leather sofa, surrounded by 3 police officers. And for the first time in 10 years, she no longer looked like the elegant, controlled woman she had always been. Her flawless makeup was streaked with tears. Her golden dress was wrinkled and dull. Her hands were cuffed in front of her dot. The ring, my $3 million ring, was no longer on her finger. Lewis stood beside her, waving his arms as he argued with a detective. When he saw me enter with Frank and Patrick, his expression shifted instantly from panic to fury. He stormed toward me, and I could see it clearly in his eyes. He blamed me, not his thieving wife, for everything that was happening. "Mum, you have to fix this right now," he shouted, his voice echoing through the crowded lobby. "Cynthia is being publicly humiliated because of you. Her friends are posting videos everywhere. Her reputation is destroyed. Her reputation, I repeated calmly, though my hands were shaking with rage. Lewis, your wife stole a ring worth $3 million. This isn't a misunderstanding over a trinket. This is a serious crime. But Mum, he protested, you never told us you owned anything like that. If we had known, none of this would have happened. Cynthia thought it was just some old worthless ring. Frank stepped forward and handed Lewis a thick folder. Mr. Lewis, he said evenly, these documents confirm the ring's value, its authenticity, and its insurance coverage. Your wife did not steal a worthless antique. She stole a historic piece of jewelry valued at $3 million. Lewis opened the folder. As he flipped through the pages, I watched his face drain of color, disbelief turning slowly into shock. This can't be real, he whispered. Dad really owned all of this. Why didn't you ever tell us? Because your father believed it was safer to keep our wealth private, I replied quietly. And judging by the fact that your wife has been stealing from me for 2 years, he was right. Stealing from you for 2 years. Lewis asked sharply, what are you talking about? Patrick stepped forward and placed another file in front of him. Mr. Lewis, he said, your wife has been systematically selling your mother's belongings for nearly 2 years. We've documented 12 separate thefts, totaling approximately $45,000. Photographs, receipts, transcripts. Recordings. Lewis stood frozen as his world collapsed in front of him. The woman he had married, the woman he had defended, while allowing me to be treated like garbage, was a thief who had been exploiting his own mother at that moment. Detective Garcia approached. Mrs. Dolores, I need to confirm a few details. Did you give your daughter-in-law permission to take the ring? Absolutely not, I answered firmly. I have the text message where she admits she took it without asking. Taking something without permission is called theft. And can you confirm that the ring legally belongs to you? Frank stepped in. Detective, here are the documents. The ring was purchased by Mrs. Dolores's late husband in 1975. It is listed in his will, fully insured, and registered as part of her inheritance. The detective reviewed the papers and nodded. Everything appears to be in order. Mrs. Dolores, do you wish to press criminal charges? Before I could answer, Cynthia cried out from the sofa, Dolores, please. This was all a misunderstanding. You know I would never intentionally hurt you. I've always treated you with respect. I turned toward her slowly, for the first time in 10 years. Cynthia wasn't speaking to me with contempt. She was speaking with desperation. For the first time, she needed me. Respect? I asked quietly, stepping closer. Was it respect when you told me to eat in the kitchen while guests sat at my table? Was it respect when you humiliated me for 10 years in my own home? Was it respect when you stole from me for 2 years and called me senile? Her eyes widened in panic. Steal from you. I never stole anything. This ring is the only thing I ever took. Patrick stepped forward and held up the photographs. Mrs. Cynthia, we have photographic and video evidence of you selling your mother-in-law's belongings at pawn shops on at least 12 occasions over the past 2 years. Cynthia's face turned goat. She looked from the photos to me, then to Lewis, desperately searching for a lie that might save her. They were just small pieces, she whispered. Things you didn't use anymore. I didn't think you'd notice. I thought you'd forgotten, and that gave you the right to steal them. I asked, and to lie, telling pawn shops they were heirlooms from your grandmother. Lewis stared at her in horror. Cynthia, did you really do this? Did you really steal my mother's things for years? She broke down sobbing. Lewis, you know we needed the money. Your salary wasn't enough for the lifestyle we wanted. She had so many things. I thought she'd never notice a few missing pieces. They weren't yours, Lewis shouted. They were my mother's, and you made me believe she was losing her memory when she asked about them. That was the moment everything became clear. Cynthia hadn't just been stealing from me. She had been manipulating my son into believing I was developing dementia. Every time I questioned a missing item, she whispered that it was normal for elderly people to forget. I turned to Detective Garcia, feeling an unexpected, powerful calm. I want to press every possible charge, I said, for today's theft and for every theft she committed over the past 2 years. No. Cynthia screamed, please, Dolores, I'll return everything. I'll pay you back. Don't do this. I looked her straight in the eyes. For 10 years, you made me invisible. You humiliated me in my own home, and for 2 years you stole from me while convincing my family I was losing my mind, making me believe I was losing my memory. And now that the consequences have arrived, you expect me to show you mercy. But I didn't know it was that serious, Cynthia cried. I didn't know those things were so valuable. If I had known, if you had known, I interrupted quietly. What then, Cynthia? You would have stolen even more. I let the question hang in the air long enough for it to sink in. The problem isn't that you didn't know the value of what you stole, I continued. The problem is that you stole from me at all, and that for 10 years you treated me like trash. Frank turned to the detective. Detective Garcia, we would also like to file charges related to the other documented thefts. We have sufficient evidence to prosecute at least 12 additional cases. The detective nodded. Understood. Mrs. Cynthia, you are under arrest for grand larceny in the first degree, multiple counts of theft and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights were read, I looked at my son. Lewis stood frozen, watching his wife being formally arrested for the first time. He truly understood that the woman he had married was not merely difficult or demanding. She was a criminal who had been exploiting his own mother for years. "Mum," he said in a broken voice, "I didn't know." "You have to believe me. Perhaps you didn't know about the thefts," I replied steadily. "But you did know how she treated me. You saw every insult, every humiliation, every moment she made me feel invisible in my own home. And you said nothing." Lewis lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. For 10 years he had chosen silence, the easier path, the path that allowed the abuse to continue, I thought. He muttered that if I stayed out of it, you too would eventually work things out. "Things don't resolve themselves, Lewis," I said. "Not when one person is systematically abusing another. Your wife didn't just disrespect me. She stole from me, manipulated me, and planned to steal even more." As we spoke, I noticed several gala guests openly filming us with their phones. The story would be everywhere by morning. For Cynthia, who had built her entire identity on appearing elegant and respectable, public exposure was worse than prison. Detective Garcia began escorting her toward the exit. But just before they reached the door, Cynthia twisted around and screamed at me, her face contorted with rage and desperation. "You don't understand what you've done," she shouted. "My life is ruined. My friends, my reputation, everything is destroyed. And for what? A stupid ring you never even wore." "No," I replied calmly. "For 10 years of humiliation, theft, and mistreatment. Today's ring was simply the final straw. But I gave you a family," she screamed. "I gave you grandchildren you never had. Lewis and I gave you a purpose in your old age." It was the most absurd thing I had heard in years. "You didn't give me a family," I said quietly. "You turned my family into strangers who treated me like a burden. And as for grandchildren, you and Lewis chose not to have children. You said they would ruin your figure and interfere with your career." Lewis visibly flinched with every word she spoke. He was finally seeing her clearly, manipulative, selfish, and willing to lie without hesitation when faced with consequences. "Dolores," Cynthia shrieked as the detective tried to move her again. "If you go through with this, you'll lose your son forever. Lewis will never forgive you for destroying his marriage." I turned to my son, Lois. I asked quietly, "Do you believe that? Do you think I destroyed your marriage?" He stood silent for a long moment, processing everything he had learned in the last 2 hours. Finally, he shook his head. "No, Mum. My marriage was destroyed the moment Cynthia decided to steal from you the first time. I just didn't see it until now." For the first time, Cynthia had nothing to say. She had counted on Lewis blaming me, as he always had before. But this time, the evidence was undeniable, and the lies were exposed. After she was taken away, Patrick handed me another folder. Mrs. Dolores, there's something else you should know. He paused before continuing. During our investigation, we discovered that Cynthia had been consulting an attorney who specializes in wills and inheritance law. Lewis looked sick. What does that mean? It means, Frank explained, that your wife wasn't only stealing in the present. She was planning for the future, researching how to take control of your mother's entire inheritance after her death. Patrick nodded. We found emails discussing the possibility of declaring your mother mentally incompetent. My blood ran cold. She was planning to have me declared incapable. Yes, Patrick confirmed that. In one email, Cynthia mentions that you frequently lost belongings and suggested this could be used as evidence of mental decline. Of course, we now know you weren't losing anything. She was stealing it. Lewis collapsed into a chair. My God, he whispered. She was planning to take everything from you. And more than that, Frank added, she had also been pressuring you to convince your mother to move into a retirement facility. Once institutionalized, it would have been far easier to obtain a court order declaring her mentally incompetent. I suddenly recalled every conversation in which Cynthia casually hinted that I was too old to live on my own, that I needed professional supervision, that I would be happier in a facility designed for people my age. None of it had been concern. It had been strategy. A calculated move to take control of my fortune. Mrs. Dolores, Patrick said carefully, your daughter-in-law is far more dangerous than we initially believed. This wasn't impulsive theft. She created a long-term plan to seize your entire inheritance and legally declare you mentally incompetent. Lewis lifted his head, tears filling his eyes. Mom, I never suspected any of this. When Cynthia talked about a retirement home, I truly thought she was worried about you. I sat beside him and took his hand. Lewis, she manipulated you the same way she manipulated me. She always knew exactly what to say to sound caring while hiding her real intentions. Frank closed his folder and looked at me gravely. With the evidence we've collected, the district attorney will likely offer Cynthia a plea deal. Depending on how this proceeds, she could face anywhere from 5 to 15 years in prison, and the money she already stole. I asked. Many of the items were sold to private collectors, Patrick explained. We expect to recover about 60% of their value. The rest was likely spent on her lifestyle. Lewis exhaled slowly. So what happens now to me, to our family? In just 2 hours, everything had changed. My daughter-in-law was facing prison. My son finally understood he had been married to someone who exploited his own mother. And I, the senile old woman, had become the center of it all. Lois, I said gently, what happens now depends on who you choose to be. For 10 years, you stayed silent while your wife mistreated me. Now you know who she truly is. What will you do with that truth? I want to make things right, he said. I want to make up for all the times I didn't defend you. Making amends isn't about money, I replied. It's about respect, about never allowing anyone to erase me in my own home again. He nodded. Can I stay here tonight? I don't want to be alone after everything. For the first time in a decade, my son was asking, not demanding. Of course you can stay, I said. But tomorrow we'll talk seriously about rebuilding our relationship. As we left the hotel, the story was already on the news. Elderly millionaire exposes daughter-in-law's $3 million theft by morning. The entire city would know that Dolores the Invisible Woman was far more powerful than anyone imagined. The next day, I woke up feeling different. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. Louis had slept in his old bedroom. When I came downstairs, he was in the kitchen making coffee for me. "Good morning, Mom," he said. His voice carried something new: respect. I sat at the table where Mario and I had shared 40 years of breakfasts. The same table where Cynthia had made me feel unwelcome for so long. Louis placed the cup in front of me and sat down. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I kept thinking about every time she treated you badly, every time you couldn't find something, and I assumed it was your memory." "Louis," I said softly, "don't punish yourself. Cynthia is intelligent. She knew how to make cruelty look like concern. But I'm your son," he said. "I should have protected you. What matters now," I replied, "is what you do next." Before he could answer, the phone rang. It was Frank. "Dolores, the case just expanded. Police found a hidden room in Cynthia's basement. She wasn't just stealing from you, she's been running a full-scale antique theft operation involving multiple wealthy families. The FBI is now involved." Louis went pale. Frank continued. "They found dozens of stolen pieces, art, jewelry, documents. Your house wasn't just a target. It was her headquarters. After the agents arrived and explained everything, the truth became undeniable. Cynthia had lived a double life. To Louis, she was a devoted wife. To me, a cruel manipulator. To others, the mastermind behind a criminal network. When they finally left, Louis sat beside me, broken. "How do we move forward from this?" I looked at my son and felt a strength I hadn't known in years. "We don't let her define our future. We tell the truth. And we make sure no one else is silenced the way I was." Days later, I stood before reporters in my emerald green dress, confident, composed, unafraid. "My name is Dolores," I said into the microphone. "And this is not just my story. It is the story of countless elderly people who are underestimated, ignored, and exploited." I waited. I watched, I gathered proof. And when the moment came, I acted. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't invisible. I was finally seen. My home had once been turned into a command center for a criminal network. Of course, I felt betrayed, but alongside that pain was something unexpected: power. In the end, it was me who stopped it all. My report triggered the arrests. My evidence exposed the entire operation. After the press conference, something remarkable happened. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists from across the country wanted interviews. Documentary producers wanted to tell my story. But the calls that touched me most came from elderly women who recognized their own lives in mine. One woman, Diana, called me in tears. "Dolores, after seeing you on television, I realized I might not be losing my memory. My jewelry has been disappearing, and my daughter keeps telling me that forgetfulness is normal at my age." Another woman, Grace, told me her daughter-in-law had been pressuring her to sign documents she didn't understand. "Your story made me realize I need my own lawyer, not the one she recommends." That was when it truly sank in. My experience with Cynthia was not unique. There were thousands of elderly people being exploited by those they trusted most, many without the knowledge or resources to defend themselves. That evening, Lewis and I had a long, painful conversation. "Mum," he said quietly, "I've decided to divorce Cynthia. I can't stay married to someone who hurt you and lived a double life." "It's a huge decision," I told him. "I'm certain. For 10 years, I chose her over you. That was the worst mistake of my life. I won't repeat it." A few days later, I received an unexpected call from a television producer named Peter. "Mrs. Dolores," he said, "have you ever considered hosting a show? A place where elderly people can call in, share their stories, and get guidance from you, legal experts, psychologists." For the first time in my life, someone wasn't dismissing me because of my age. They were offering me a voice. That night, lying in bed in my own home without feeling like an intruder, I reflected on how quickly everything had changed. Just a week earlier, I had been invisible. Now, my story was helping others recognize abuse in their own families. Message from Frank arrived. "Thanks to your case and Cynthia's cooperation, 6 more members of the network have been arrested. Your courage saved many families." I smiled as I turned off the light. Cynthia had spent 10 years trying to erase me. In the end, it was my patience, intelligence, and resilience that ended her reign. 2 weeks later, Dolores's wisdom became a national phenomenon. Calls poured in daily. Frank established the Dolores Foundation for Senior Protection, funded with money Cynthia had once planned to steal. The irony wasn't lost on me then. Patrick called with astonishing news. "The FBI has dismantled the entire network, 15 people arrested." Despite her cooperation, Cynthia has been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. 12 years. The woman who tried to make me disappear would now vanish from society herself, and yet the story didn't end there. One afternoon, my phone rang. Dolores. It's Cynthia. She was crying not the manipulative tears I knew so well, but something raw and broken. I envied you, she confessed. Your home, your marriage, your place in the family. I thought if I made you small, I could feel powerful. For the first time, she told the truth, and for the first time, I felt no triumph, only sadness for what had been lost. Later that night, I told Lewis about the call. What matters, I said, is that we never allow someone toxic to control our family again. He nodded. I've learned the hardest lesson of my life. Months passed. Then something beautiful happened. Lewis introduced me to Nicola woman who looked at me with genuine respect. She asked questions, listened, included me. She didn't try to erase the past, she honored it. One day she asked, "What can I do to never become someone like Cynthia?" Respect the family you're joining, I told her, and never try to control it. 6 months later, Lewis asked me to help him choose an engagement ring. It felt poetic. Everything had started with a stolen ring, and now love was choosing honesty instead. Their wedding was held in my garden, among the flowers Mario and I had planted decades ago. When Nicole hugged me and said, "I hope I can be the daughter-in-law you deserve," I knew the family had been healed. Years later, messages still arrive from people around the world, men and women who found their courage through my story. One evening, Frank called with final news. Cynthia's appeal had been denied. She would serve her full sentence. And how did I feel? Not angry. Not vengeful. Free. Cynthia was no longer part of my story. My story was about rebuilding, about dignity, about finding power where I once felt invisible, as I looked up at the stars. I whispered, "Mario, I hope you're proud." The sweetest revenge was never her downfall. It was becoming who I truly was.